So we had a plan with the extension, lockdown arrived, changed everything. Here's our journey. So, welcome to McKinley. This is our first outside broadcast, and I'm really pleased to have Richard back here, who's been part of our team for the last, how many years?
Too many.
At least 10. He is very good with his answers, is Richard. We'll never get through this. We're here to talk about the extension, or rather specifically, the top level of the extension, the line that goes from Sheffield to Wakefield and Halifax. And Richard played quite an instrumental part in that in the early stages with me, didn't you? Do you remember?
Yeah, and it was a while ago now.
It was.
It's been a long process.
Do you remember they're going through the stuff about pushing me towards freight?
Yeah, and that was quite a long journey. I should say, in my defence, I'm more interested in American modelling, and it's very freight centric. It's about moving commodities in freight cars from place A to place B, and then on to C. Much less emphasis on passenger, and McKinley has a strong passenger history, and I think I was pretty keen to, with others, to move you over to that side purely to give you operational interest. You've got a big team, and it seemed an obvious way with the opportunity the extension had to go.
I had that shocking moment with you when you said, have you ever thought about ripping up London?
Well, it was a metaphor really, but I was trying to make the point that there is this kind of British obsession with infrastructure of platform stations, and they take up a lot of room. I mean, you've got a lot of room here, but they still take it up.
Yeah.
And so if you've got an 8-foot long train, you've got to have an 10-foot long platform, and you've got to have a 10-foot long carriage siding, and you've got this, that, and the other, and it does stack up. And I do believe you don't. It's right to question whether you need all of these things. Freight can be, chopped up into more manageable areas. But it was a discussion that was worth having, and it's kind of evolved from there, I suppose.
When we started to consider how we would implement freight technology, we assumed that we could find a way with RFID. We didn't know how we were going to do it, but that was going to work. We just made that presumption. We didn't do any design work on this until the start of 2020, and we were working together on Monday nights, and then lockdown arrived. And that completely threw things out of the window. What on earth could we do? And then Zoom arrived. We started to adopt the idea of playing with Zoom to share screens and printed papers and all these things, but that wasn't working particularly well. And then tactically, Malcolm was incapacitated for a number of reasons. His health had deteriorated, and also he couldn't get to grips with this Zoom technology. And so we were in a bit of a cleft stick about what to do next. But suddenly that Zoom solved it, because we could then engage with Richard in terms of, could you help us out? Would you like to be involved in that design of the Wakefield and Halifax extension? And Richard rose to the challenge. It was amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was great, and I was really glad to do that, because it's probably worth saying that I'm one of the team members who is not in the Bournemouth area.
Yeah.
So I come down here occasionally, but not very often. And that gave me the chance to engage on a weekly basis with what became a subgroup, the Monday night subgroup, the design group. And then we had the tools then.
Yeah.
And we moved it forward from there, and it worked really, really well.
And the interesting thing is that I suppose what in hindsight now I look back on is that formalisation of process, i.e. the Monday nights, we couldn't actually physically knock timber together, we couldn't lay track, we had to just go through that design. Do you remember?
Yes, it gave time for reflection. We had a week between each session, a chance for everybody to go away, take in what we decided. I personally went through multiple iterations and sort of recirculated them. Yeah. Everybody came back, and we must have done 20 versions of this design, but always drawing back to how do we operate it, who's going to be there, what are the physical restrictions. It was a completely different way of designing the layout from the original McKinley layout, which I wasn't involved with, and you'd remember from 20 years ago and more, and it's a totally different world. And it evolved beautifully, actually, and we had sort of different skill sets in the group, and I think it was a very productive process, very rewarding, and I hope that your wider operating crew, your 20 people or 15 people, in years to come will, at the end of the day or at the end of the night, have had a much better time and more satisfying time using the layout because of that time we spent on it.
What I've got here, Richard, is three of the epochs of design. There's the first one, there's halfway through, and then there's the final one here. And
this first one is pre-lockdown. It sort of feels like about 50 years ago.
I know.
I think this was the steam era.
Well, it's all in the steam era.
Oh, right.
But I just looking at, if you look at this design, do you remember the first one, we had the operational constraints over here.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably worth describing where we are physically in the room, because we'll have seen it in previous videos, but Sheffield, the giant Sheffield yard, which you featured quite recently,
is on the left
on this
of this
series of videos, is on the left-hand side here, and therefore is a very busy, it's the core area in the extension room. So you rang me up one day and said, help, we've got some sidings and industries up the left side, but we can't have people there, we can't have 6 people there, so we can't have them there, and so they've got to go down at the bottom, and we'll call that Wakefield, and then round at the top here in the sort of the other operating area, which is the 2 sides of the Halifax yard, of which more later, is how the real estate is going to work. But there were problems with it, and as we've already sort of intimated, freight had gone up in the world in its sort of priority, and so we had to kind of revisit this.
We did. And we went
in quite a big way, actually, much more than I thought we would at the time.
Hugely so.
It looked kind of nearly finished, but actually we tore it to pieces.
We tore it to pieces and put it together again. So the structural framework, the structural integrity of the line and the way it loops round stayed the same.
But before that, what's under the lines, we've got the jolly old benchwork, and we got sort of four layers of sidings and Hades under this.
Yeah.
But do you remember when we remeasured it, we found that there was a foot more wood than we were, or was it the other way around?
It's foot less.
Was there less wood or more wood?
Foot less wood on the length.
And so
crucial.
the room wasn't quite as big as we.
Oh
my goodness!
How did we get there?
And I thought for one horrible minute that the end of all the storage yards would have to be rebuilt, but we didn't have to do that, fortunately.
So then we got on to the version here. This is the second drawing. And this is when we thought we'd got the design cracked. We spent months on it, do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, this was about the 20th drawing, actually. To save everyone going into a coma, this is the second one we're looking at. And this took a long, long time. And actually, we did Wakefield first, because we realised Wakefield, which is at the bottom, and Halifax, which is the top, was too much to do in one hit. We'd never agree on anything. So we did Wakefield as a standalone and left the whole of the top of Halifax for a separate project. That's how it worked out. And even Wakefield, which doesn't look incredibly complicated. I mean, we've got 4 storage tracks up to the left. You've got the sort of marshalling classification bit in the middle where you ferry freight in and jiggle it around a bit and then move it all out again. And you've got the distribution centre. It's probably worth sort of talking about what's actually going to be there. The distribution centre down in the bottom right-hand corner of this big building, which we were going to call Grattan's. And we've now changed to Albury's.
We've decided to celebrate Malcolm's
in recognition of Malcolm's massive contribution to McKinley over decades, actually.
20-something years.
Absolutely,
from
absolutely.
From 2000 onwards.
Yeah. So that's Albury's. And you have a lovely way of describing what the distribution centre is.
Yeah. So I would say that
everyone gets this.
It's like the Amazon of the 1960s. Everybody used to use the mail order catalogues, send off their order in an envelope.
And you could get everything.
Anything. They sold everything, from cookers to push bikes to ironing boards to suits and shirts.
Umbrellas.
No, got them as well.
Yeah, cuddly toys.
And then, do you remember we shared this? We then, after we thought we cracked all the design...
Yeah, you think you've thought of everything.
We thought we shared it with the Thursday night group.
Oh dear.
And then Brian Martin came and said, you can't shunt.
You've forgotten the head shunt on the left-hand end. We did have a head shunt, i.e. the place where the trains get shuttled in and out of while you're building them up. And we had a kind of east one, but not a west one, or a lower one and not a higher one. And he was straight onto it like a
I'm really
fox
glad.
on a rat. And yes, we had to, and that was a problem because we'd used all the space. So we had to chop one of the main lines out.
Chop one of the main lines and turn the line.
It's just like having a heart surgery and realising that you've done the wrong operation or something.
It was a mission.
You were supposed to correct a broken hip. It was, and it went backwards and forwards. So from a group of 6, it then went to a group of 25.
Who then tore it to bits
and
in a nice way.
Savaged it. In a constructive. It was always constructive.
Yeah.
Otherwise we would have ignored them completely. But we didn't do that. And then we had to have a bit of jiggery-pokery a few extra crossovers. People always get very hung up on where the points are.
Well, actually,
individual points.
Yeah.
You can spend a whole evening talking about one point.
But actually, a lot of the big change was
great.
that head shunt here.
So we're down the left-hand side down to
yeah.
the bottom,
and also the way we marshalled brake vans. And then what happened is when we actually
so we can't.
When we actually built it in prototype,
yeah.
which we're going to cover in detail in the Wakefield section, the operators then found that actually stuff didn't work particularly well in certain areas.
Yes, because at this stage we still hadn't actually let anyone loose on it because it
No.
wasn't even built. So that was, that's the next stage.
Yeah, so the prototype, physical prototyping, actually proved to be another great benefit after we put all this in.
Yeah.
And so finally we've now got a design that we have tested with, when we had the end of the first lockdown, we had this small window of time to allow James to get in here with us and build it on the test environment. We then had operators coming in pairs, separate nights, and they ran it through and were trialling.
And that was between the two lockdowns.
Yeah,
we just got this window that was long enough before we got shut down again.
Yep, and that was it. So, but we then certain that actually we had everything working well.
And an additional point on the final design is that once we were happy with the track work and we'd made the adjustments that the larger team had suggested, like the additional head shunt and some operational tweaking, we then toned down the track work significantly on the plan and added the additional operating components. For example, uncouplers here in yellow, or potential positions for uncouplers, which is a critical point of about how we operate McKinley. Red and green emblems here for RFID, two different types of RFID tags, and also track colouring. It's quite hard to see on this, but track colouring to indicate the BDL 168, the Digitrack boards for train block detection as well. Again, an important part because this design is still supported by train controller and the computer on the main lines. The operators work the yards, so that was very important that was shown as well. So there's a fantastic amount of detail here, but critical for the overall sort of global understanding of what we were trying to achieve.
There were two separate Zoom nights going on at the same time. The Monday night design, as Richard called it, the subgroup, that was focused on the extension for Halifax and Wakefield. And on Thursday night, in order to keep everyone's morale up, we would have railways at home, where everybody was doing, talking about their other interests in railways, what other stuff they had maybe in their loft, rather than just what was focused on McKinley. And we had a whole series of these presentations, and one of them, James Norris, was talking about how he was building a baseboard layout for a customer in London in the MRS workshops, and he was doing a phenomenal job. And he was uncluttered by constraints and space. He had the industrial tools there for doing things. And that planted a seed in my head because we were just coming to the conclusion of the extension design in terms of the track plans with Richard and Gordon and Clive, Ian and Bernie, when this idea came up. And we then talked about, with that in mind, how could we build a prototype? And that was an interesting point. Do you remember that night we had the conversation about, well, how can we get to prototyping it, getting the operators to test it, make sure if we're going to build it off-site, and that it would fit in the room?
Yeah,
that was quite one.
It was a bit of a mercy, actually, because I thought we'd just carry on designing it forever. I mean, it felt like it just went week after week, and someone would say, actually, can you just check? And I think, oh no, okay, maybe lockdown won't be long enough. And so we got to this stage where we had thought, right, we've got to commit to this now.
Yeah.
But how do we build the mock-up? And we went through all sorts of ideas, and weird and wonderful things were suggested. And by an incredible coincidence, you got some toys with you, and this is what we ended up with, or a small piece of it anyway.
What we have ended up doing was we printed the sheets, the designs, the AnyRail designs out full scale on A0 sheets and got them printed. That was relatively inexpensive, actually. We then purchased this 6mm foam board and we spray mounted it. I've just got a Pico track plan here, and we spray mounted these A0 sheets of paper onto A0 sheets of foam board and then cut out the track. And then once we did that, we then stuck it on this foam board. And this foam board, if I take this pin out a second, do you remember, this foam board comes in 8x4 sheets and it's 50mm thick. And you can cut it with a hot knife, and we were sticking the foam boards down onto the shapes, but also bearing in mind that now we had to add an additional constraint. Do you remember this? Where are we going to physically cut it and break it to
Well,
fit
I think
it
at one
onto
point
the
you
layout?
realised he couldn't get it up the stairs.
Yeah,
Or couldn't get it back down the
well, we
stairs.
got
I'm
an
not
8
sure what we
before
did.
sheet up, that's for sure.
I know, but you know, foam's one thing and wood's something else, and it was
Yeah.
Planning a sectional layout in sort of 2 dimensions was quite difficult.
Yeah, and then they go to the third one.
Yeah.
But we got there. We actually built this stuff up. We then laid track on this directly, and wired it up with a basic level of electric DCC operational support. And actually, we had 3 different operating nights, just 2 operators on their own with a set tasks to do. How did it perform? And they came back with 2 or 3 suggestions. So we knew it worked. We knew it fitted because we found we had sometimes there's a couple of inches spare. So we extended it in little
That made
places.
Gordon very excited.
Well, we added 8
He
inches.
loved it. He wanted to start adding extra things.
Oh,
We
no.
wouldn't let him.
Nope, we had to keep it there.
He still wants a dock, I think, doesn't he, somewhere? But
He does, but we can't go there.
he's not having it.
So, and this lot has all gone off site now to be constructed with the track attached to the whole thing in great big chunks of styrofoam, and you'll see those in a future video as they're being transformed into real layout, really.
And one thing we found as well, worth mentioning this because it happens again and again, when you design something, and I spend a fair amount of my time on these CAD programs, the computer will determine, depending on the parameters you set, what you can and can't fit. It'll just say no. Computer really does say no. So you think, oh, okay, I can't do that. Can't have a medium turnout here or a medium point. I want a short point. I want a curve point. They just don't work sometimes. And you go back to the client or the group and say, yeah, I couldn't get that in. Sorry, I have to do something else. When James started to build it, you rang me up one day and said, oh, I can get the long points in. And I said, no, you can't.
Yeah,
Can't
he
do
did.
it. And obviously long points are always better if you can, particularly because we have a level of automated running and all the rest of it. And I was so thrilled about that, and I'd spent 6 months battling it, and he cracked it in 5 minutes. The track always talks in the end. The computer, doesn't matter what the computer says.
Yeah.
And it was a good lesson, and it's one of those kind of truisms of design. It really does work like that. You have to build it eventually.
Yeah, that was good. So all we're waiting for now is for James to give us a call to say, come and collect. No pressure, James. So hopefully now you understand a little bit of the process we've gone through, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'd also like to say just thank you to you, Richard, for coming down.
It's been you are the first person I've been away and visited for 18 months.
You see, and look at that.
It's been fantastic.
And I'm going to take him out and buy him a new shirt.
It was fashionable when we started.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. See you soon.